And once again, we are live. How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Paul the Star Wars Guy, and welcome to my second weekly Wednesday night live stream. So, I figured tonight's live stream would be about just sort of going over things that I missed in regards to my original trilogy reviews, and just talking with the chat about their thoughts on the original trilogy as a whole. So let's get this place populated. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Make sure to like this video, and we'll see what happens. So one thing right off the bat that I wanted to go over that I missed in my last video on Return of the Jedi, I really did not harp on the Emperor too much, and I really should have. All three of my videos were just completely just whatever popped into my head. I just said it, and of course that leads to forgetting some things. So, the Emperor. The Emperor, first off, another perfect casting in Return of the Jedi from Ian McDiarmid. And he played the perfect... He basically played the perfect ultimate evil in Return of the Jedi as the one who, by all appearances, had the... basically everything going on in the galaxy he knew about. He said in the movie it was him that let the rebellion know what was going on with where the shield was on Endor. He's the one that knew that the Death Star would be operational when it was, so that they could attack the ships. And he thought he knew that Luke would turn to the dark side, and to be fair, he nearly did. But yeah, the Emperor was a great add-on to Return of the Jedi, and Ian McDiarmid did a great job. Give me a second while I share the stream out with people. And to all the people that have just now showed up, hello there. My name is Paul the Star Wars Guy, and again, this is just a stream capping off my thoughts on the original trilogy, sort of wrapping up the 3 videos that I've done on them, going over things that I've missed. I just talked about the Emperor, and I want to know what you guys think of the original trilogy too. I think it's pretty safe to say that anyone who calls themselves a Star Wars fan to any degree has some form of admiration and respect for the original trilogy. I've never seen nor heard of anyone that calls themselves a Star Wars fan that genuinely dislikes the original trilogy. I can understand if you prefer the other trilogies over the original trilogy for whatever reason. I may not agree with them all, but I can at least respect your reasoning. But I've never met anyone who calls themselves a Star Wars fan that either... Oh, hey, Derelict. Daryl the Derelict says, I couldn't imagine any other person playing the Emperor than Ian. I agree. And going back, and on top of that, I also think that them changing Emperor Palpatine in Empire Strikes Back to where it's Ian McDiarmid's version instead of whoever the other person was, that is one change that I think was definitely for the better. But yeah, going back to what I was saying, I've never met anyone that calls themselves a Star Wars fan that genuinely dislikes the original trilogy. But I think that would be a very interesting thing. Robert Pearson says, the OT has to reign above all others. Fight me. You're not wrong. I I'm still, admittedly, for the longest time, I preferred the prequels over the originals back when I was judging them just off how much I enjoyed the lightsaber fights. But in watching the movies again for this channel, I'm starting to see them in a different light now when I'm considering the whole picture. So when I do a stream about, when I do my videos on the prequels and ultimately do a stream about the prequels, that's what next live stream is going to be about. We'll see what happens there. So real quick, I'm just trying to get my stream shared out on my Twitter and on my Facebook. For some reason, it's not. There it is. Doing this off my phone real quick. So while I'm sharing this, how are you guys doing today? It's gotten cold out here where I am in Virginia. It's going to get down. It's only like a high of, I think, 50 or something tomorrow here, when 2 days ago it was in the 70s. My grandmother on my dad's side used to have a saying, if you don't like the weather in Virginia, wait 5 minutes. It's hard to predict what's going on with this weather. So let's talk. So Robert Pearson says, I've been drinking, so I'm very drunk. I can hear my bed calling, so I'll be gone soon. That's fine, man. That's fine. If you need to get your rest, go ahead, get your rest, man. I appreciate you showing up and supporting me. So give me one quick second here. I'm going to send out this. All right. And let's see. Robert says, show me the way to go home. I'm tired. I want to go to bed. I've had a little drink about an hour ago, and it's gone straight to my head. And he says, love Jaws the movie. I have never seen Jaws, ever. Felix says, hi, everybody. The original trilogy is the foundation of everything Star Wars. Yes, it is. Everything, and honestly, the original trilogy, specifically A New Hope, is kind of the foundation for a lot of what we take for granted these days in modern day filmmaking. Now, admittedly, my movie knowledge pre A New Hope is very sparse. The movies that I've seen that have come out either before or around the same time as A New Hope, the first Rocky, Smokey and the Bandit, the Sean Connery Bond movies, and remembering those movies, I can't think of any technology that they used in those movies that they used in Star Wars. Like all the ways that they made the space battles using the miniature eyes of the X-Wings and the set of the Death Star doing the trench run, the technology that they used to make that, I don't remember them using that in any other movie before Star Wars. And of course, look at what we have today. Not only do we have more and more movies using these miniatures of, using ships and such like that as time went on, but now we've progressed to full-on CGI, which again, Star Wars kind of, at least with the lightsabers, I think, helped progress that further. So yeah, I fully agree. The original trilogy is the foundation of everything Star Wars and beyond. And yes, this is the way. Now, I do also want to mention, as I said in my last videos, the version that I am most familiar with is the special editions. So all the added CGI stuff that George Lucas put in there is what I'm familiar with. And even as someone that has barely seen anything of the original versions, I still 100% agree that there were certain things in the special editions that were added that just really didn't need to be there. For example, the scene where Obi-Wan, Luke, C-3PO, and R2-D2 are going into Tatooine, and you see all the added CGI creatures and such, that just did not, and that just didn't age well for me. And Robert Pearson says 2001 A Space Odyssey has amazing effects and was 1968. Okay. All right. I've never seen that movie, but I will certainly want to go check it out now. I know that that's where Ric Flair's wrestling theme came from, but that's pretty much all that I know of that movie. So I'll definitely check that out. But yeah, getting back to what I was saying, with all the added CGI stuff that they put into Mos Eisley, it looked like it came from a GameCube game or a PlayStation 2 game, and not in the best way. Felix says, I wish that Lucas had kept the deleted scene in Return of the Jedi when Luke ignites his green saber for the first time. I agree. And as I said in my last video, what ultimately drags down Return of the Jedi for me, why I give Empire Strikes Back just the slight edge over Return of the Jedi, is I think the stuff in Jabba's palace, while it's not outright bad, it does kind of overstay its welcome a little bit for me. What I personally would have done if I was making that scene is I would have had Leia in the bounty hunter disguise, Chewbacca, R2, and 3PO go in together. And basically Leia as the bounty hunter would turn over Chewie, R2, and 3PO. Not just turning over Han Solo's first mate in Chewbacca, but the two droids that Han Solo was knowingly associated with for a little bit extra coin. And then you have R2 in place on Jabba's sail barge with Luke's lightsaber, and then you have C-3PO getting made to become the interpreter. So you still have everyone in their places, but it gets done a little bit quicker. And then Daryl the Derelict says, be prepared to listen to the Blue Danube for 15 minutes. Don't worry, man. I survived the Fantasia level of Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, which is nothing but that type of stuff, so I'll be fine. And he also says, I think it was left out so we wouldn't know that he made the new one. Hail Daryl the Derelict, and Robert Pearson, and Felix Quiros. But back to this comment here. I think it was left out so we wouldn't know that he made a new one. I could see that. In fact, if I remember a little bit of trivia about Return of the Jedi, Luke wasn't even really supposed to have a green lightsaber. If you look at the original box art, Luke's lightsaber was blue, but they made it green because blue made it blend in too much against the daylight of the Tatooine sky. Let's see here. Answering someone back on Messenger. But yeah, Luke was not originally supposed to have that green lightsaber. It was supposed to be blue, but I'm glad that he got that green lightsaber because green's my favorite color. And I think, personally, green lightsabers look cooler than blue lightsabers. So, but then again, though, how would they have fit that into the movie if they had kept it? Because if I remember the scene didn't start with Luke fixing up his saber and turning it on. It started as sort of a transition from Vader arriving on Death Star number 2, where he goes to his little meditation chamber and he's trying to reach out for Vader, and then it transitions to Luke fixing his lightsaber, also meditating, and then he turns it on for the first time, only to turn it off and give it to R2. So here's how I think they could have fit it in. Also using my idea. They could have fit that in. Then they would have had Leia walk in, see Luke's new lightsaber, and see him give it to R2. And then we see that them actually make the plan of, okay, Leia, here's what's going to happen. You're going to be this bounty hunter, and you're going to take Chewie, C-3PO, and R2-D2 and turn them into Jabba the Hutt so that they can be in place to help bust out Han Solo. Lando's already in place undercover. Don't worry, you'll be fine. And then Leia would have gone to do that. C-3PO and R2 would have been put in their places. Chewie would have been put in that holding cell. And then we get back on track with Leia busting out Han Solo from the carbonite and getting caught. So if they had done it like that, they could have kept that scene in, and it really would have took about the same amount of time in the movie. But unfortunately, they didn't keep it. Felix says, do you think the Obi-Wan, Book of Boba, and Mandalorian Season 3 will keep honoring the original trilogy legacy? I certainly hope so, but as I kind of mentioned in my last live stream, I am a little bit concerned with what the Obi-Wan show is going to do in regards to that rematch of the century that Miss Kennedy mentioned in that big thing where she announced all these shows. Because how are they going to have Obi-Wan and Anakin fight each other again without it completely undermining the lightsaber fight that they had in A New Hope? Think of it like this. There's 20 years between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. As it stands right now, Revenge of the Sith was the last time that Obi-Wan and Anakin turned Vader ever saw each other in person. Wouldn't it be more impactful instead of, say, them being so imagine this. The line that Vader says in A New Hope, I sense something, a presence I've not felt since, and then he stops the sentence there. If the Obi-Wan series is set right in the middle, 10 years apart from either movie, apart from Revenge of the Sith and apart from A New Hope, imagine if that sentence was finished like this. I sense something, a presence I've not felt since 10 years ago. Or, I sense something, a presence I've not felt since 20 years ago. For me, that 20 years just kind of hits different. Makes it feel like this is more important of a reunion than if it happened 10 years ago. So, I'm certainly interested, but also concerned with how they're going to pull that off. But as far as Book of Boba Fett, yes, I 100% think they'll keep with honoring the original trilogy legacy, give a little bit more insight to how Boba Fett escaped the Sarlacc, and Mandalorian Season 3, honestly, given everything that's been happening with that show, it's kind of hard to say what's going to happen with it. I could see Mandalorian season 3 going very well. I could also see it going very poorly. And this is all dependent on whether or not these rumors of Rian Johnson coming in to direct an episode are true. So we'll just see what happens with that. And I'll be, of course, paying attention to what's going on more and more. But getting back to the original topic I was talking about of the changes of the special editions, and also tying into why I don't like the Jabba's Palace scene, the biggest thing that they could have cut this and nothing would have been missed, was they could have cut the musical number in Jabba's Palace. And this applies both to the original and especially to the special edition version. Yes, the Jedi Rocks song is a catchy song, but the CGI that they used for that is just as bad as the CGI that they used for the added Mos Eisley stuff in A New Hope. And literally all that scene accomplishes is teasing the Rancor, which they really could have left that a surprise once Luke was dropped down into his pit. And if you got to get your wife some food, Daryl, I'll see you later, man. So if they had done the plan to bust out Han from the carbonite a little bit differently and condensed it down, and then they had also cut the musical number, I think the Jabba's Palace stuff would have flowed a little bit better. But that's just my opinion. So let's see, what else could we talk about with the original trilogy? It's very hard to think of things to talk about with the original trilogy because so much of it has already been said. We've talked already about how technology-wise, Star Wars, the original trilogy, set up a bunch of stuff that we take for granted today. On a creativity level, the original trilogy is really not matched by anything except for other sources of content within its own universe. Like, seriously, how did George Lucas come up with things like Jedi, things like Hutts, things like the Death Star, things like Sith, things like all these different alien races that we see? I genuinely wish I had the level of creativity that George Lucas has. I'd probably be able to make all kinds of stories with it or make all kinds of music with it. Who knows? But still, I genuinely do not think, especially in this day and age, that the creativity of George Lucas to even come up with this stuff and figure out how to bring it to a visual medium is talked about enough, because that was some seriously... He had to have spent a lot of time thinking up this stuff. And of course, that's all multiplied when you include the prequels and all the stuff that they added, which we'll talk about soon. But I think it's cool. I heard a story once about the character Porkins, the one who was in the squadron of X-Wings that attacked the first Death Star. I either heard or read that Porkins, the actor that played him, got upset that his character's name was Porkins because he was somewhat of a more heavy-set dude. And George Lucas actually pulled him aside and actually managed to convince him that there actually was a very good reason for his character being called Porkins, and basically laid out just right there on the spot this whole backstory of how basically Porkins got his name. I don't remember reading what that backstory was, but just the fact that he was able to come up with something like that at all is really cool to me. Let's see. What else can we talk about with the original trilogy? Well, so let's talk about this real quick. I don't think I really made this clear enough when I talked about it in the A New Hope video, but I want to talk about my thoughts on each of the lightsaber fights the in the original trilogy. Naturally, I think that Return of the Jedi's lightsaber fight is the best, and it's my favorite of the whole series. And for the longest time, I thought the A New Hope lightsaber fight was my least favorite because, again, back then I was judging it just on how flashy the moves were, being spoiled by seeing episodes 1 and 2 first. Now, I certainly understand why they. I certainly understand that that George Lucas really was not sure how to bring an actual lightsaber fight to the big screen for the first time. I remember watching some of the behind the scenes of episode 1 where both George Lucas and Nick Gillard, if I said that name right, were talking about how the original inspirations for the lightsaber fights in the original trilogy, especially in A New Hope, were off old school kendo and samurai fights, and you can really see this in the A New Hope fight. And you also have to consider that Alec Guinness was an old man in that movie, and he's not going to do the same moves as what Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen are going to be pulling out in episode 3. So I certainly do not hate the A New Hope fight anymore, but I do believe that all of the lightsaber fights after it are a clear improvement as they became more and more aggressive. And speaking of that, I think I got this from a Star Wars theory video once, heard that really neither Vader nor Obi-Wan really wanted to kill each other in that fight, or that they were both holding back. Vader was holding back because he still remembered what happened last time that they fought, and he ended up losing in the most horrific way possible. And Obi-Wan was hesitant to fight Vader because he really did not want to kill his apprentice, and of course he still had the trauma from fighting him that last time also. But again, I think the end of that fight was the perfect ending for Obi-Wan as a living character, and probably one of the most Jedi things we've ever seen in the original trilogy. There's 2 scenes in the original trilogy that I think show. Felix says they both were cautious. Yes, I agree. Now, back to what I was saying. There's 2 scenes that really stick out in my mind as far as showing in like the most purest sense what a Jedi would do in that moment. And the first one is Ben sacrificing himself so that Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie, and the droids could get away on the Falcon, and letting Vader strike him down. And then the other, of course, is Luke throwing his lightsaber away after he's realized just how close he was to turning to the dark side after he cut Vader's hand off on the second Death Star. And he proclaimed that he was a Jedi like his father before him, and that he would never turn to the dark side. Both of those moments, to me, both of those moments visually just show what a Jedi is, what the ideal Jedi is, not thinking of themselves, but thinking of others and putting aside their own feelings and emotions in the subject for what's the greater good of the galaxy. And it'll be interesting when I start talking about the prequels to talk about the Jedi of the prequel era, how basically not that they were, And let's see, we got another message. Okay. I was just checking my messages on Messenger real quick. So, yeah. Let's see. Felix says, I think Obi-Wan could have killed Vader really easily if he wanted to. Yeah, we know he could have, because he killed Darth Maul in Rebels in 3 moves. Not because because basically he was fighting smarter, not harder. I think, so yeah, I could easily see Obi-Wan, even in his advanced age, being able to easily kill Vader if he had wanted to. Because if I remember correctly, Rogue One, of course, took place the end of Rogue One took place literal minutes before the beginning of A New Hope. And if I remember correctly, the reason, basically Vader was, in a way, if what I heard, I think again from a Star Wars Theory video, was true, Vader was basically fighting injured in A New Hope because of the hallway scene where I think some of the blaster fire did get him. I'll have to go back and look at that for sure. But basically, that's why Vader's suit is so scuffed up in A New Hope, because of the hallway scene. So for me, it's not too far-fetched to believe that perhaps some of those blaster fire that got shot at Vader in the hallway scene of Rogue One, some of them found their mark and Vader was fighting injured, which could explain why Vader seemed like a much better fighter in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Which, talking about the Empire Strikes Back lightsaber fight real quick, I think that Luke versus Vader on Bespin is probably my number 2 or 3 favorite fight. For now, I'm going to say number 3. I do have the Obi-Wan versus Anakin fight above that, but I do also really like Luke versus Vader in Episode 5 because of the game of cat and mouse that it is at the beginning, where Vader is just toying with Luke at the beginning because he really doesn't want to kill him. All he wants to do is prod him into the carbon freezing chamber. But then as the fight goes on and Vader sees that Luke isn't going to go quietly, he starts getting more and more aggressive, throwing things at Luke and ultimately bringing down those big swings, trying to actually kill Luke. And then, of course, cutting his hand off. So, from a storytelling wise, maybe it might not have had all the psychological stuff of the Emperor and Vader trying to turn Luke to the dark side in the middle of the physical fight. It may not have had that, but I can certainly enjoy Vader versus Luke in Episode 5 for the game of cat and mouse that it is. That Luke is just completely out of his element with Darth Vader because his training was incomplete. See, when you really get into it, pretty much all 3 of these fights have some really, really interesting psychology to them. Again, Obi-Wan and Darth Vader really don't want to fight each other, or they're being cautious about it. The Episode 5 fight with Luke and Vader is basically Darth Vader playing with his food. And then, of course, Episode 6, my favorite one, Luke not only having to withstand a physical onslaught from Vader, but a psychological onslaught from both Vader and the Emperor, trying to goad him into using his anger. Now, speaking of psychology and symbolism, I want to know, to the people watching right now, put it in the comments, what was your takeaway from Episode 5, the cave scene, where Luke has that vision of fighting Vader, and he, of course, wins, decapitates Vader, and the mask explodes, and shows Vader's face. Sorry, it shows Luke's face in Vader's helmet. Daryl the Derelict says, I'm on my phone. The New Hope fight is closure, stalling, and giving Luke the push he needed to become a Jedi. Empire is grief and vengeance. Jedi is the fate of him and his father. Okay, yeah. That's another good interpretation of it. Basically, because think about it. What if Obi-Wan didn't die on the Death Star? What if... Yeah, because anger leads to the dark side. But yeah, what if Obi-Wan didn't die on the Death Star and escaped on the Millennium Falcon with everyone else? Luke's training would have looked very, very different. And, of course, Star Wars Theory made a video about this, detailing out what he would have done with this scenario, and I could see it fully happening where Obi-Wan takes Luke to Dagobah pretty much right after blowing up the Death Star, and basically both him and Yoda train him to become a Jedi even more powerful than what he was. Or it could have turned out even different than that. But going back to the cave scene, I am really curious what you guys think was the intended message, or what interpretation did you guys take away from the cave scene in Empire Strikes Back? Because the interpretation that I took from it was that it was intended as a foreshadowing of the eventual reveal that Luke was the son of Darth Vader. I don't think that was I don't know, and I don't think that was the intended interpretation for that scene, but I want to know what you guys think of that. And also, how do you think that whole trial was supposed to go? Let's see. Felix says, the mask scene is at a place where the dark side of the Force was trying to mess with Luke's mind, same as what happened to Rey in the Death Star in Rise of Skywalker. Okay. But my follow-up question to that is, what was Luke supposed to learn? Like, had Luke gone into the cave unarmed, as Yoda originally said, you don't need your weapons, had Luke actually listened, how was that whole trial supposed to play out? Would it be like something where Luke has to face his fear of Darth Vader? Let's see. Excuse me. Daryl says, if Luke continued down the path of vengeance and anger, he would become like Vader. Okay. All right. That actually makes more sense than my original interpretation, and I could see that being one that George actually intended on it being, because that does make sense, and they do repeat that quite a bit, both before and after that whole scene. If you remember, Yoda twice, once in Empire, once in Return of the Jedi, says that a Jedi's strength flows from the Force, but beware, for anger, fear, and aggression, the dark side are they. Once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny, just like it did Vader. So, by what Daryl is saying, that scene was just a visual retelling of that saying. And yeah, I think that is exactly what George Lucas intended with that scene. So thank you for that. And going back to what you were saying, Felix, where, let's see, Felix says that helps him for his duel with Vader in Return of the Jedi. Yes, and that's ultimately why Luke throws his lightsaber away when he could have easily killed Vader in Return of the Jedi, because he had just cut off his hand. Vader is unarmed. Luke, if he really wanted to, could have struck him dead, and then it would have been easy pickings for the Emperor to sway Luke from the dark side from there. But Luke realized just how close he was to turning to the dark side, and he realizes just how similar he is to his father, especially when you remember that they zoom in on the stump of Vader's right arm, and they see the exposed wires. And then, of course, Luke sees his own hand. And on that, you guys remember the scene earlier in Return of the Jedi where Luke is fighting on top of the sail barge and this random thug gets a lucky shot in on Luke's hand and some of the fake skin, like right about here, gets blown away and you see the exposed wire? I think that was yet another foreshadowing for the later scene where Luke takes Vader's hand and sees the exposed wires coming out of his wrist, and he looks at Vader's wrist and he looks at his own hand and is like, wow, I really am just like my father. And that's what leads him to throw his lightsaber away and choose to go down a different path than what his father did. So this all just goes back to show that George Lucas is a storytelling genius to have come up with all of this symbolism as well as all of this creativity. And that's why it's so fun talking about the original trilogy, because you can still get all of these different interpretations, even if not intended ones. You can still get all of these different interpretations from the more symbolic stuff of the original trilogy, like the cave scene, for example. So let's talk about this. What do you think would have happened had Vader survived the end of Return of the Jedi? Because that's another thing that I really like talking about with these what if scenarios of what could happen if certain things in A New Hope in the movies happen differently. And one of the ones that intrigues me the most is, what if Darth Vader survived the end of Return of the Jedi? So what I think would have happened is he for sure would have been, to a degree, he would have had to have faced some sort of trial, some sort of justice for the crimes he had committed against the galaxy by the new government, the New Republic. And they, of course, would have found him guilty, and since he had now turned to the light side, and he would have admitted his guilt, and then I could see them going one of two ways with this, where they would either choose to give him the death penalty or they would imprison him for life. Or they could try to imprison him for life, but maybe Luke talks to Mon Mothma or whoever, and somehow, I think this would be very unlikely, but somehow manages to convince her to have mercy on Vader and just allow him to go into basically a self-imposed exile, which he does. But then let's say Luke goes with him, and together, father and son rebuild the Jedi Order. This is where we get into more of that just random spitballing ideas for Star Wars. I like just coming up with random things like that. But yeah, I think as interesting though as it would have been to see Vader survive. Let's see, Felix says, I think Anakin and Luke would form a Jedi Academy. I do too, along with what other Jedi are still out there, like Ahsoka, because we know that Ahsoka was alive in Return of the Jedi. I think seeing Anakin alive again, seeing Anakin still alive but now good again might have been enough to convince Ahsoka to fully commit once again to the Jedi way. So you have Anakin, Luke, and Ahsoka, and Leia, if she chose to do that. And through those 4, they train up a whole new generation of Jedi. And I think it would have also been cool to see the relationship between Leia and Anakin develop, because as I mentioned in my last live stream, reading the book The Truce at Bakura, the Force ghost of Anakin did appear before Leia in the middle of that book, and she pretty much rejected him because she refused to see her father. She refused to see that Darth Vader, the man that committed countless atrocities around the galaxy, including torturing her for the information of the Rebel base and destroying her home planet, she basically refused to see that her father would be capable of any of that and rejected the Force ghost of Anakin. So it would have been very interesting to see. Honestly, now that I think of it, it would have been very interesting had Vader survived, not just to see Leia cope with the idea that Darth Vader is her father, but also the galaxy at large seeing this basically the number 2 of the Empire now turned good, and he wants to help rebuild the Jedi Order to basically make the galaxy what it was before the Empire. Some might be willing to give him a chance, but I think most would be completely untrusting of him. And I agree, Felix, that would be very cool to see. But again, there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through to even get to that point. So as cool as it would have been to see Vader survive, I think ultimately Vader dying as Anakin was the right thing to do. Now, here's another thing we could talk about. What if... Actually, I want to talk about this real quick. So, I remember reading, when I was in the Navy, the comic series, the Star Wars Infinities. Now, for those that don't know what that is, it's basically a comic book series talking about what-if scenarios like what I just did, but like more bigger. But let's see, Daryl says it goes in more depth in their relationship in the Heir to the Empire trilogy. Very cool stuff. Thank you for telling me that. I'm still working on reading Heir to the Empire, the first book, so I'll definitely be looking for that as I read into it. I haven't had as much time to read it these days, between work and church and honestly doing YouTube, but I will for sure do my absolute best to pick it back up and keep reading. Because I really want to. I'm genuinely ashamed. Actually, I won't. Ashamed is not the right word, but I recognize that I missed out on a lot as a Star Wars fan from the old Legends continuity, so I really want to get myself caught up with that. But anyways, going back to what I was saying. So this comic series, the Star Wars Infinities, showed 3 different comics showing from 3 different what-if scenarios. For example, what if Luke Skywalker failed to destroy the first Death Star and the fallout from that? And then the second comic showed where A New Hope happened as normal, but what if Luke Skywalker froze to death on Hoth? And then there was a third one showing what if the rescue of Han took too long. In fact, I think I loaned this comic to my sister, and I'm going to want to get it back from her, see if I can read that again. But yeah, it was really cool to see how just one change in the story, what the fallout would be from that whole scene, and how different the story would end up. Like, for example, if I remember correctly, in the scenario where Luke fails to destroy the Death Star, Leia ends up getting captured by the Empire again, and Vader finds out that she is Force sensitive, and Vader basically takes her on as her apprentice, and I think even reveals that she is his daughter, and then it ends up being Leia versus Luke, Leia versus Vader and Luke. Wait, no, I got that mixed up. Luke versus Leia and Vader is what I meant to say. And then in the one where Luke freezes to death on Hoth, Leia ends up going to Dagobah in place of Luke and receives a Jedi training from Yoda, but Vader ends up following them to Dagobah, and then we have a really cool confrontation, sort of a spiritual confrontation between Yoda and Vader, where Vader is basically made to re-experience all of the suffering that he had caused in his lead up to becoming Vader. And you even see visually Vader de-aging and sort of de-evolving back down to Jake Lloyd Anakin. And for a minute there, it almost seems like he truly is regretful of all this stuff, but it's just a ploy to ultimately kill Yoda, at which point Leia ultimately defeats Vader. And then the scenario where they showed Han Solo's rescue from the carbonite taking too long, I don't remember much about that one, but I do remember at the very end of that, because they took too long in rescuing Han remained permanently blinded from the carbonites, and they also showed at the very end that Darth Vader does indeed survive the end of Return of the Jedi and turns good and comes back basically in a completely white version of the Darth Vader suit, and it looked really, really cool. But again, that's all what if stuff, and that's all Legends canon now. So whatever. Well, I have pretty much run out of stuff to talk about with the original trilogy. Just to put my thoughts on the original trilogy pretty much into one statement, the original trilogy is, for its flaws, a masterpiece. There may have been some stuff that I'm not the biggest fan of, or things that I think could have done better, but still, what we got is just seriously 3 of the best movies ever made. And hopefully they still remain the best movies ever made. At least that's how people see them in the years to come. So I'm about to wrap up this stream here. So my next 3 videos are going to be about the prequels, and then my next live stream will be about the prequels too, and then from there we'll get into the sequel trilogy. At some point, though, I will start. Let's see. Felix says the original trilogy changed the world. That is the understatement of the century, my man. But yes, it did. Oh, and by the way, Felix, I saw that clip of you and your son fighting with lightsabers. I have a few lightsabers too, so we may have to see one day who's the better lightsaber duelist between the 2 of us. But we'll see. But yeah, that's going to be it for this stream. So at some point very soon, I'm going to start doing more Star Wars news videos. I wanted to get out all my thoughts on all the movies before I start covering that, just kind of to establish a baseline on my thoughts of Star Wars. But depending on what's going on, especially with all these leaks that people like Doomcock have been reporting on, I may have to start getting into that soon. And yes, that would be great. So yeah, I will see you guys next time. Thank you guys for watching this stream. And yeah, thank you guys for being here.